Hello, everyone. This is your host, Akil Jabbar, and welcome back to another episode of SaaS District. On today's episode, we'll be talking about how to validate and build your startup directly through industry and corporations. Today, we have our guest, Thomas Peterson, with us. Thomas is a serial entrepreneur, startup expert in service and product design, innovation, branding, UI, UX, and just generally building great, innovative startups from scratch. Thomas has worked with hundreds of different organizations, spanning from early stage startups all the way to large Fortune 500 companies. Thomas also co-founded Hello Group in 2006, which was sold to NOA Group in 2018, while spending time with a company called 8020 before they were acquired by Square in 2012. He was the creative director of Square for 5 years, where he developed some of the core products and services that exist there today, taking it from a startup idea all the way until their successful IPO. He is now the co-founder and CEO at First Principle, a creative venture studio focused on starting, helping, and funding businesses, including founding several companies such as Weekend Hacker and GhostNote. At First Principle, Thomas and his team help entrepreneurs and corporations create category-defining products around the world. Some industry leaders they've worked with to build these startups include Adobe, Intel, Verizon, HP, Fidelity, Sony, Google, Citibank, Nokia, Amazon, among many, many others. So welcome, Thomas. Really glad you're able to join us, and thank you for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
Awesome. So I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add to that intro, but if not, maybe
No,
could you just...
you made it sound like my O visa application. I had a really good lawyer that made me sound amazing there. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Okay, awesome. Do you think you can share a bit about your background? You know, how you got started as an entrepreneur, and
Sure.
what was the moment you decided to start Hello Group in 2006, if that was the first moment?
Yeah. So I mean, my background is I think like most people who ends up in this world of entrepreneurship and startups is a little bit different than most other people's, in the sense I have no fancy degrees. I have no college degrees even. I'm a failed rock star, to be quite honest. That's kind of how it all started. I spent my early years, practicing and playing a lot of music, and through that had been like doing a lot of work regarding how to promote bands and stuff like that, and had always had this kind of like little bit of, I have to like have a business running at the same time as I had to find ways to go out and promoters and find ways for the band to be to be making some money. And so I started like this like kind of weird place, and I was a guitarist to begin with, and then when the grunge kind of movement started in the 90s, it was obvious that they didn't need any more guitar heroes. And so I kind of slowly moved into some other areas, and one of the things that happened was that I got a job at a telemarketing company, doing canvas sales, basically like having to call people up and trying to sell them our products. And that kind of got me interested in kind of the business side way more than I anticipated. And so I ended up studying at a school in Denmark called IMA, which was a weird mix of marketing and technology and design. And through that, I was lucky that I got an internship actually in San Francisco, which was called Meta Design. And that company had like some really great designers there. And even though I didn't have like a design background, I got to work with some amazing people there. This is like the late .com bubble years, so like the late 90s, where you got to work with, some very, very, interesting companies and amazing entrepreneurs that were doing stuff that, back then was kind of unheard of. And so I did that for some years. And then when the .com bubble crashed, I spent a year extra, I think, in San Francisco, and then I went back to Denmark and worked for an advertising agency for a little while. And then I basically decided, after having met some people, among others, a guy called Morten Lund, who was an early stage investor in Skype, and he was looking for some people to help him basically go in very early on in a company and invest in companies very early on, and then help them basically productify their business. A lot of them, the companies he invested in, were very technology heavy, so they were basically really great engineers, but they might not have the best product thinking mindset. And so what we did basically was we went very early on into the companies and basically helped them take the product from a great idea in a seed round maybe into an A round, and by kind of taking the technology and really try to turn it into a great product. And did that, for some years. That's where I started Hello Group back then with a bunch of other entrepreneurs. And basically, the whole idea was to, become back then to become kind of a design agency for startups. As most people know, with startups, they often don't have enough money, a lot of money. So we had to find ways to mix that up. And so we actually ended up started talking with larger and large organizations. And it turned out that they had a lot of issues themselves because they were all trying to be, innovative and trying to do new stuff in the market. But often the size of the politics and just the way that large organizations have to think to stay large organizations kind of got in the way of them of doing something kind of interesting or innovative there. And so we ended up, taking on a lot of those kind of projects. And so that's kind of how I got into this whole thing. It started out with music and ended up with, kind of taking all the things that are in supporting yourself as a musician and turn them into, building businesses.
Yeah, I love it. Just go from hustler to entrepreneurship. I think that's the best way, right? Through. Would you consider that one person who, when you first launched that first company, the one that you said was invested, would you consider him like as a mentor? And do you think he was like the spark or like, confidence that gave you to say, okay, let me go and, create a company? Would you say?
He was amazing. Like he was definitely foundational to where I ended up, I would say. He was a very interesting guy, and still is. He was, as I said, he was early investor in Skype, and he'd done like a bunch of other things. One of them was actually and Kazaa was kind of like an early file sharing thing that kind of got banned. But there was the Nicholas and Janus from Skype that actually then ended up doing Skype after that, and he was involved in those guys. And he had so many connections. I remember one of the first kind of weeks that we kind of started working together. He introduced me to Bill Clinton's lawyer. That was his lawyer during his time as a president who had like this new company that he wanted to start. So he was very well connected and was kind of opened my eyes for like the kind of the entrepreneurial lifestyle, if you like. There's a lot today. It's a very like modern lifestyle to be an entrepreneur, but back then he was kind of one of the first ones who opened my eyes to this idea that you can kind of invest in not just in your own time to make money as a salary, but you can invest in other people and in other companies and ideas and spend some time, but then get paid in some sort of a share of that success, right? And so he's very important to me, I think, very early on especially.
And what was it that made you, or when did you decide to join Square as the creative director? Was that after they acquired one of those companies you were working with, and you said,
no? So actually, Square happened because with Hello Group, we in 2008 we tried to kind of start Hello Group in New York, and I spent some time in New York trying to set up a company, and basically that failed when the whole thing crashed, and so when I got back, I was kind of thinking I needed to get back to the US, and I really liked this idea of being in New York. Felt correct for me to be there, where Denmark was great, and we did a lot of great stuff, but I needed to do something different. And then a guy that I used to work with back in my meta days in San Francisco had just started out 80/20, a design agency, and they were doing really well and was kind of looking to find ways where they could get sold. And so they asked me, what I thought about that. And I said, well, I think if you're an agency, you need to find other things than just your agency to sell, because otherwise, you're not going to make that much. You might do like 3 times your revenue. And even though they had, great revenue, we still had this idea about like, let's go look for some IP, maybe build some of our own products, and then see if that could be part of the package. And then what actually happened was before we started on that, but then before that kind of got anywhere, we ended up basically selling the company to Square instead. And that kind of gave us what we were looking for, like the upside of technology that's scalable, and at the same time, kind of still doing what what we did was as a design agency, right? And so it was Jerry and Andrew Borowski and Andrew Lin, who were the three main founders of 80/20 that kind of did that and have still gone on to do some cool stuff in other companies. But yeah, that was the whole 80/20 thing. Was kind of this thing that turned into Square. It was not something that I looked for, and we were even considering whether it was something I wanted to get into. But it's one of those products that because it has like this funny like part digital and part hardware. It matters to other people, and it was one of the few products where I was like, okay, if this doesn't exist tomorrow, other people are going to be worse off. So it was worth kind of working on something like that. And then, of course, we got like a good deal with them so that we could vest some stock over time and things like that.
Cool. So you're kind of absorbed through that acquisition through 80/20 into a role within Square. And then I know that you were kind of with them all the way until they IPO'd, right? And what was that like for you as a stakeholder if you had some shares at the time? Do you remember what it was like? Do you have the feeling at that moment when they IPO'd and you had all this kind of cash or value?
It was very interesting because in the beginning, even for those who don't know, but so Jack Dorsey, the co-founder of Twitter, is behind Square, right? And we kind of called him the golden child because the media loved him, and whatever he kind of touched, became a good thing. And then as we were kind of gearing up towards the IPO, it was interesting just to experience how the media landscape changed quite a lot. It became much more negative, and we had kind of some hit pieces on Square about like how we were not really doing that well, and that was very interesting to see how the media kind of sometimes just turn around. There was even there's even a famous kind of email being sent around about like that's actually how the media works. It's like first it builds you up and then it takes you down, and then it hopes to kind of build you up again, right? They're looking for the stories. And it was very interesting to see that because you knew what the truth was, and then at the same time you were hearing all these things. So that was very, very interesting. And then the IPO was kind of emotional, because we started out having high valuation, then we had to kind of take that down, and then you were worried about, well, is that even gonna help? And so when we IPO'd, and things felt proper and felt like it was going well, then that felt really good, I think. But it's also what happens when you go from a stage where you've been doing a lot of innovation, kind of trying to find some product market fit, is that you kind of become a janitor suddenly when you're like in a company that is open, public on the market, right? Because now you can't do as much innovation as you might want to do, and the job that you have suddenly become more maintenance than anything else, right? You make sure that you improve on things that are kind of that needs further improvement, but that where all the fun stuff of like as a designer is kind of taken out of that, right? And so I realized after that I needed after like 2017, we IPO'd in 15, we went out in 2017, and kind of wanted to do something else. And one thing that I really wanted to do is I wanted to go back to become my own master again, and not work for someone else, but work with other people.
That's what I hear with other founders after they sell to a big corporation or a bigger company, or they exit, and then it becomes less exciting and less innovative, and then you're just dealing with more like bureaucracy and kind of politics, and it's not as fun as what the same thing when you first enjoyed it. So I like the concept of the creative studio as a path for entrepreneurship, right? It's very similar to like an agency setting where you're kind of get to build different businesses and validate different businesses, but you're doing it for you get more kind of upside and equity and kind of more room to play with. But for those of you who are on our audience who aren't familiar with a creative venture studio is, can you explain what that is and the background?
I mean, to be honest, like the biggest difference between a kind of a classic agency and a creative venture studio is that we actually have more skin in the game, in the sense that what we do is, instead of doing a classic project for a company where they pay us a certain fee for that project, we either do what like a mix between they might pay us some, but then the rest we will kind of work off in sweat equity. So it's kind of a mix where we will lower the rates and we will put in some work, but then On the other hand, we will get access to the potential upside of the company down the line. So that's kind of, I think, the most important distinction is like you basically get more skin in the game there. And we do three things. One is we do this, sweat equity slash capital, where we work for a fee. We also sometimes would invest if we find somebody who have a great idea. We would invest actual just money in them because we like what they're doing and maybe help them with finding funding or some initial ideas maybe. And then the last one is, which is something we do with large organizations, where we go in and kind of work on helping them build products inside of their own organization. The primary difference is that a venture studio, you have skin in the game, in the sense that you do a mix where you don't just charge a fee for whoever you work with. You actually you do a mix where you charge a fee, but you also get some equity, so you lower the rates that you would normally be working with them in. And so that's one way that you could say the difference between a classic agency model and then creative venture studio is. We also do two other things. One is we do straight up capital for small funding rounds, angel rounds, seed rounds for companies that we find interesting, that we might not be involved in actually designing or developing products for them, but just because we kind of like the whatever they're onto. Mm-hmm. And then the last one is a classic kind of pay the bills approach, where we work with large organizations to help them do innovation inside of the organization. And one of the big problems they have, which is what smaller entity normally can help with, is that you can kind of one of the big problems when you're a large organization is that you don't get excited about small annual revenue, right? Or even small monthly revenue. You don't get excited about $50,000 monthly revenue if you are used to $200 million a year budgets, right? Yeah. But if you're a small company or have a small setup, you can get very excited, maybe even about $1,000 a month. And that kind of sensibility to being excited about smaller revenue is actually what often makes small companies outcompete big ones in the long run, right? You have the whole classic innovator's dilemma that Peterson used to talk about, right? Which is that the large organizations, they just don't see like what's coming, because they can't access that, because for them to do that, they would have to lower their revenue quite a lot. Whereas the small companies, they can kind of build on a lower revenue and then establish a stronger and stronger base. And so that's been like a continuous problem, I think, in large organization, obviously. And so that's where we can go in and help them, and we have kind of some principles that we use to help them unlock and make sure that they don't get trapped in this political game or get trapped in this idea that you need $200 million to have a sustainable business.
Makes sense. Yeah. So and from there, so you work at Square. You kind of got, after the IPO, you did design many innovative products there. At what point and what was it that gave you the idea or the pull to start First Principle? What did you go directly to that and say, hey, this is it, I'm going to start it? Or was it like, going through a couple of ideas and then finally nailing down, look, this is what I'm going to do and continue?
It actually came out of a frustration that I had for a while when I was working with startups, especially, was that, as much as they loved, my input when it came to design, they were less often interested in hearing my more strategic or tactical advice to them, right? And because I've done so much, I accumulated quite a lot of knowledge about like how to approach this. It doesn't mean like it's not that I know how to make a company successful, but I know what to avoid. I know some things that, especially in the beginning, might give you a little bit longer runway, allow you to maybe do a pivot more than you were capable of if you don't do the right things, right? And so what I realized was that even though they loved the talk, they were just not ready to pay for that, right? They just wanted the design work at the end of the day. And so that's why I kind of changed the model around and said, well, if I want to have a say in this, I need to have skin in the game, as I said, in order for that to happen. And so that's why we started, coming up with this like kind of equity model and said, okay, if you want to get in and do this, I know that a lot of these companies that I talk to, if they just do like 2 or 3 things, the chance of them being successful is going to, increase quite a lot, right? But I need them to listen to me. And so the way to do that is to basically get a stake of the company so that I'm somehow involved in the more strategic process, right? And I think that became like that's the way to approach that, and it's, I think, served us well so far.
Can you share what those 2 or 3 things are that are super valuable that people come to you for?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely do that. I would say the 2 or 3 things that are valuable. Okay, so the first thing is, often if you are a company and you want to launch a product, one of the biggest problems that you run into is that you spend a lot of time, building your product, and then you think, now that I've done my product, I'm ready to go out there, right? But then you haven't spent the same amount of time making sure that you communicate your product properly, right? You haven't spent the same time actually making sure that, well, that life that it now have to live after you spend all this time, developing it, creating it, that's actually the business. Building up towards that is not your business. That's just building, the foundation for your business, right? And then after that, you need to go out and actually run a business. And so one of the biggest, kind of benefits if you do this right is if you start, looking at how you approach communication. A lot of tech founders are notoriously bad at communication. Either they're introverts, or they just don't consider it a thing because they consider maybe the technology behind that, some of the feature sets to be important, right? So to, first of all, partner with or have someone, in your company that actually knows how to take all this stuff and distill it into something that most people will understand. They won't understand all the complex stuff or the technology stuff. They will understand like, okay, how does this benefit me? What is really the point about me, signing up with you, right? So that would be one of the first things I think that that you could do quite a lot with very little, right? I mean, I even wrote about the other day, like just the idea of going from having proper written copy on your website. That actually is much more powerful than whatever great amazing graphics you can do if you're a good designer, right? If you don't have the proper copy, then it's just hard to communicate sometimes what it is that you want to have implanted in people's heads. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that comes back to this thing that this whole principle around minimal viable products, right? And there's this interesting discussion about how you shouldn't build too much because if you do that, then you wait too long to actually figure out whether people even want your product.
Right.
But obviously, you also have to build enough that it is a product, right? And so one of the things there is, we can normally go in and very quickly help these companies figure out, whether they have too much or too little when it comes to feature set, and whether they even have something that you can call a product. This comes a little bit back to what I was doing with Morten Lund earlier on, especially with these like more tech-driven companies, right? It's like, okay, let's figure out what is really the essence here. What is the actual business that we are trying to establish here? Mm-hmm. And then I would say that the last thing, again, I'm looking at this from what can I as a product designer bring to this, not necessarily, as a financier or something like that. And the last thing I would say is, then once you actually launch something, how do you make sure that you can improve your product and work on finding this product market fit? And there, we have some, very simple ways to approach that, where, we have some principles around, starting simple and staying simple as long as possible. Okay. And one of the reasons we do that is because if you do start very simple, you can kind of measure what works, right? And if you start with something more complex, it's hard to figure out what was actually working and what wasn't working. And so really trying to kind of keep the companies stay disciplined around just staying with as few factors as possible before they know if something is working or not, before they add something new. These things can do quite a lot actually to, if nothing else, give you some longer runway and make sure that you learn from your launches instead of just launching and then hoping that everything is going to go well.
Makes sense. Yeah, and I hear that a lot from founders who are building, but they try to build and compete based on features. So they build, I need, this feature and this feature and this, and that's the only way I'll compete with the other guys, versus like, you're saying, stick to one thing, be really, really, really good at it, and then slowly building on top of that as like a pillar, based on demand, right? And what the market says.
Yeah, and it's interesting that, like I would even say like most companies have like some core protocol that the whole company is built on, right? For Twitter, the tweet is their core protocol, right? For Square, the transaction is the core protocol, or for Stripe for that matter. Like there's always some core element that is your business.
Mm-hmm.
And if you understand that, it becomes much easier for you to think about your product more holistically and kind of be able to, understand what you're doing right or wrong and look for, problem areas, opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
If you have that, almost like a philosophical approach to your company, right? Obviously, that shouldn't go away from sales. It's still sales, But as a founder, often, especially with some of these companies that we often look into, they're like a funny mix of something very complex engineering wise, and then something that's might be consumer oriented or even business oriented, and that complexity. You can very easily get lost in it and think, oh, it's only about these metrics, or it's only about content marketing, or it's only about innovation, or it's only about price, right? But like to be able to kind of step back, I think that's what the best founders do. Jack Dorsey was really good at that. He's like probably one of the few CEOs I've ever seen that didn't just say design is important. He knew how to use design strategically. There's a lot of companies, I think, that are good at saying, oh, design matters and design is important, and we're a design-founded company, but they don't actually know how to translate that into something, right? So it's easy to say that you're design-led and stuff like that, but It's actually much harder than you think to use it, because design is really just a way to optimize your business often. It's very rarely the foundation of the business, right? And so, again, design it's an interesting, it has an interesting role to play in all of this, I think, and that's why where other venture studios that you have out there might, have technology as their base, or the financing as their base, or the operational side as their base. Our approach have been, to use our background, which is mostly design, to basically approach kind of the same problem space. Does somebody have an idea or found a problem that's worth solving, and then how do you actually take that and distill it into something built, at a minimum, a prototype that's working, and then so you can start actually testing with what matters, right? That's kind of the essence of what a creative venture studio is doing. It's coming very fast to a realization of what this idea is and distilling it into something tangible, basically.
Makes sense. And then from the corporation level, so these corporate big industries, they're slow to move, but they have these pain points. And then you're going to how do you go about validating those ideas as an entrepreneur? Do you specifically go to these corporations and say, hey, like, what problems are you facing right now? If we go out and build this for you, do we get some kind of commitment, whether they're going to pay for it? Do you get some kind of LOI, or how do you kind of start that bridge and communication with them to actually go out and build the product for a problem they actually want to pay for?
Yeah, so it's different each time, right? But I would say there's generally two things that happen. Either they have some internal issue or vision that they need to get distilled into a product, whether it's a product vision or whether it's a prototype or a first version of something, or we might have discussions with somebody that's a high level about their business and trying to help them think about opportunities inside of the industry that they haven't seen, or new things that that they might have to look out for, that could be potential, I hate to use that word, but disruptors of their industries, right? So I think it's a combination of sometimes conversations we're having, or meetings we're having with people, or sometimes do these workshops where we go through this stuff, or they themselves know they have a problem, or they have an opportunity that they recognize that they need somebody to help them build who's not on the inside, because that's where some of the problems often start. So somebody who can approach it from a clean slate, and not be bothered by who don't like who, and what is the power structure, and who gets to have approval from who and stuff like that, right? That's where it often kind of falls apart at the end of the day with these larger companies trying to build stuff.
Makes sense. And if you're an entrepreneur, say you're just starting out, or maybe you're just very early on in your startup phase, why should an entrepreneur consider that approach to building out their model and validating their idea? And what are some steps they can take to move forward on their hypothesis, to building that relationship and finding that right person and say, look, we're going to build our product around you guys?
Yeah, it's one of these things that it's obviously going to be different depending on you know what kind of entrepreneur you are, and how strong your product vision is, and how strong your ideas are, right? I would say that the situations where something like a venture studio in general, whether creative or tech-based, whatever, makes sense, is that you have somebody who have a fairly strong idea about what it is that they want to build. They have a good idea about how to solve it, to a certain extent, i.e. they're not necessarily looking for somebody to, solve some fundamental problem, right? That is like how do we solve this? We don't know. And so then you wouldn't probably go to a venture studio, but somebody who kind of know what they're trying to build, but also want to, get it done fairly early, and they want to do it on their own terms, right? And so that, I think, when you would work with somebody like us, because the way that we engage with them is we don't have the VC's approach where you invest in a company and then you push them to grow the company, because that's not the point of a venture studio. The point of a venture studio, from our perspective, is to build a solid, sustainable business, that has a core that you can build up on, which means that when they come to us, we very quickly figure out what needs to be done and what needs to be involved in this. And then it really comes down to, building something that is, we like to say that we try to design things that we don't design ourselves into a corner, which means that, whatever we launch first to the market is always a hypothesis, right? And it might be right and it might be wrong. And everybody accepts that, right? We know it's a set of assumptions. And then the way we approach it is that if we turn out to be wrong, which almost always do, then it's not like start from scratch again. Like we still that whatever we build is generic enough that we can kind of reconfigure it and try some other directions without having to do a complete remake of everything. So I think like it really comes down to we help people come to an assumption that can be tested and be changed if needed, right? That's kind of the essence of it, because again, you can have a great idea, but that's not really what's gonna that you don't know if it's a great idea until it's an amazing business, right? Most amazing ideas, they sound stupid to begin with. They sound like toys sometimes, right? It's not really easy to figure out what's a great idea and what's a bad idea, and it's definitely not easy to figure out. When if you have something that sounds amazing, you sound like a great concept and everybody loves it, right? That's often also almost a warning sign that that's probably not a good business. Then it just sounds too good almost. And so I think again, if they come to somebody like us, what they would get is somebody who could help them basically get a product out there pretty fast. We can normally build a product in like 3 months, like a basic product, everything included with development and everything. And we don't waste time on like whiteboard exercise. And there's like a lot of things that you would normally do in an agency world. We think about it more like a startup. We like to have strong honest conversations to begin with and kind of come to a common understanding, and then we'll basically move from there pretty fast. Try to get as real as possible, as fast as possible. Everybody have their own ideas about what something is, as long as you talk about it, right? But the second you get it into like a wireframe or some design or a prototype, then everybody have to discuss the same thing. Right. Whereas you can spend a lot of time talking about something where you actually have each your idea about what it is, right? And then when you're actually building it, like, wait a minute, I thought we were doing this, and so that's kind of how we try to approach it. We're kind of no nonsense. We don't try to make elaborate processes and like that. We have just some principles that we apply depending on the situation. And then so I said, if you're early founder or have a clear idea what you want, that definitely we would be a great match for that.
So just to add to that part, so I know, I think the big value of also kind of working with somebody who's like, it's not just finding what is working, what's the right idea, but it's also being able to kind of kill the idea and say, look, it's not working. I think that's the real value as well, right? Because you can go pretty far, like 6 months, 12 months in, when actually we should have stopped this 3 months ago. So when somebody who has some experience and background like yourself who can say, no, look, this is the real feedback we're getting. This is the real numbers we should be paying attention to, and look, this is not a good idea, or we need to make changes now versus waiting a year down the line, which we already wasted, where we could have made those changes a lot earlier, right? Would you agree with that?
Definitely, and we actually that comes back to this thing about how good does your idea need to be, right? I normally like to say that if execution is all that matters, then your idea isn't good enough, right? And it's kind of tongue in cheek, obviously, but the point is that great ideas, you don't know if it's a great idea, but if it turns out to be a great idea, it also will be very easy for you often to execute it, not necessarily to be successful with it, but to execute it, because it speaks truth somehow to whatever it is that you're trying to do, right? And so we are very we are very, very critical, but we have a rule normally about that there's only one devil's advocate allowed in the room, and then the rest kind of have to fight for the idea, right? But because it's very easy to take it down, but it's much harder to defend an idea. And so when we work with these ideas, we actually often, try to have one person delegated to kind of try to just take it down, figure out every little mistake they can find, and then it's up to everyone else to kind of see if we can find ways to protect the idea. And when it comes back to like how we look at ideas, is we think about them as they're almost like little babies. They're very fragile in the beginning, and they need nurturing and protection, right? Because again, there will be a lot of people, a lot of ideas that just won't sound that interesting or potential in the beginning, and so you need to kind of be aware that that there is both a positive and a negative side, and kind of put that into a system. And once you do that, you it's much easier to kind of have conversations, because then you don't get up with these social dynamics where someone is always the negative person, right? And then that becomes almost like a problem in itself, that you have this person who kind of annoys you all the time. But if you turn it into a person's job to be the negative person, and then the rest to be positive and try to protect the idea, then that actually we found like it really, really helps moving along quite quickly. And it also allows especially founders who might be very attached to an idea to see, wait a minute, I thought the same thing, but actually they're pointing to a lot of holes, and these guys are trying to protect it with me, but we just can't, right? So that's one of the little kind of things that we learn over the years to do, to be able to kind of move forward. Otherwise, you can very quickly end up in a situation where you don't really know when you made the right decisions, or you don't really know why you're doing this company, often because the assumptions you made were just not the right ones.
Yeah, I love that that kind of idea of having somebody there just as like a red team or red squad, right? Just to kind of have a double check on you. Who is the ideal profile of founders that you're partnering with? Like, do you have a specific skill set or experience that you look for that you found to be working best and end up succeeding better than others?
Well, yeah, it's funny. Like one of the biggest tells for me normally is if somebody's very secretive, then it's normally like it's a sign that they're going to be very hard to work with, because I think that it's one thing to come with me and say, I have the cure for cancer, right? If you have that, you shouldn't even talk to me. Just go patent it, and you'll be fine, right? There's some ideas they have the market rate waiting for them, right? Most other ideas that we all get, they're kind of lame, and then there's some of them that have some potential to be good businesses, some to be amazing business, some to be really, really big century businesses, right? But one thing that I always found as an early warning sign, but who I don't want to work with, at least, is somebody who thinks that they come with their the encrypted PowerPoint file, right, where it's very hard to even get it, and you have to NDAs, that they're really, really, really secretive, because that also means that whatever they've tied their whole thing up against, and the success of something, it's very fragile, because the idea is never going to be the thing that's going to make it successful. It's always going to be how it gets treated and how it gets nurtured, as I said, right? And so that needs to be open and free, and people need to have access to that, right? Otherwise, you can't actually do much. But then you idea is so amazing that it's going to go to the sky. So that's definitely somebody I'm trying to avoid. Another one that I'm generally kind of we're kind of trying to avoid are people who are how can I put this in a nice way? People who come with a preconceived notion exactly about what it is that needs to be built and just think that we're an agency, right? That's the other kind of people that we don't work with because they become a problem for a lot of different reasons. But one of them is that that our kind of the reason why somebody should partner with us is our ability to look at your idea and look at what works and what doesn't work and kind of help you massage that into something that is then useful, right?
Makes sense.
The best people we work with is there's two types of people that I really love working with. One is the completely like I've never done this before, but I have a great insight or I have this idea that I want to do. I'm not exactly sure how to do that. Like that's a perfect example of something that's really good to work with because a lot of our experience can really help them very quickly. Take this insight or idea or kind of business market they want to attack and really quickly establish something and get it out there. And then the other one is the very numbers driven
analytical
numbers driven sales guy, right? That just looks at the numbers and it kind of doesn't really care about being secretive and all these other things, but just like look at metrics and it's really good at measuring. It has a good has a very good intuition around how to approach this, right? Like they can look at something, they know what to derive out of that. They're almost, I think that they're probably my favorite to work with because they're very opposite in many ways of the kind of person that I am. And so like that complements each other really well because I could then take some of the more fuzzy parts, right, and add to whatever they come. So they provide the insights and the analysis of the data, and then I can kind of help them, or we can help them basically, approach that, right?
Yeah, so don't be closed-minded, folks. Don't be secretive. Come in there with an open mind, and I have that same problem. I'm very analytical, so I look at numbers, data-driven decisions. That's a lot of my thing. So I like to partner myself and be around with other I'll say creative folks, such as Alejandro, our producer, to help kind of balance that out. And I find that helps a lot. Do these founders, are they coming to you with the idea and say, hey, let's do this? Or are you also going to, validating the idea with the corporations? You talk to Skype and say, hey, Skype says we have this problem. And then you go out and find the right entrepreneur to say, hey, can you execute on this with some cash? Here's some equity and a team around you to go and execute. Or is it, which one is it? Or is it both?
It's actually, I mean, to be quite honest, like obviously one of the first things that you need to do, whether you build a VC or a venture studio, or especially a venture studio or a VC, or if you want to be an angel investor, is that you need to build to make sure that you have the right people come by you and introduced to a lot of ideas. So the first thing that we've been trying to do, obviously, is to make sure that if people have these ideas, that they know where to go, and that could be one place could be to go to us, obviously. Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing, and then obviously after that it becomes a question of who you want to introduce you, and they have a, as I said, like an insight from an industry. They might be in recruitment or something like that. They might have an insight there. So they'll come to us. They have an initial idea. We help them look at that and say, okay, is this the right way to approach this? Is there another way we could be doing that? Other times, they, as I said, might have a market they want to attack, and they understand the market really well, and they know what is required to build something in that market. Also there, I would say that our primary function with them there would be to basically help them build stuff that can be, how do you call that? To basically help them build stuff that could be done in a way that very few other people can do, because they don't have this kind of background that we do to approach these kind of products.
Makes sense. And then kind of just on adding to that last point of where we were talking about some underrated growth strategies that maybe people don't think to apply to their startup, and they come to you because you have those 2-3 skills. Keep it simple, really good copywriting, with a nice design. Is there anything else that people can look at when they're first starting off that could make the big difference?
to be quite like, especially so like if you want to start a marketplace, for instance, just as an example, one of the things we normally suggest is start a mailing list, right? There's like some really simple ways where you can very quickly get up and validate whether you even have a business. And I think that's one of the first things actually that a lot more people should be thinking about. You don't necessarily need an app to begin with. You might just need or a website for that matter, right? Or you might be able to do your whole service just doing text, right? So there's to begin with, it's like what really matters is you're trying to figure out whether there is a business here or not. When there's some people who's willing to either spend time or spend money to participate in whatever it is that you're trying to build, right? And so if you can if you can validate that very quickly, then you can figure out whether it's even worth going to the next step. So I would say that's one of the primary pieces of advice I would always give is don't just assume you need an app or a website or something like that. Figure out what you're really trying to solve here or optimize or figure out, and then find the fastest way you can do that without even having to to come to someone like us. You don't even have to do that, to be quite honest. Often, if you approach this Weekend Hacker, which is this kind of place for people to exchange skills. I'm a designer, I have design skills, but I need some development skills. That was started, literally by, I posted something on Hacker News, right? And then I had a mailing list set up, and before I knew it, I had like 8,000 people on the mailing list, right? And then after that, we turned that into a website, and we probably even did that too early, to be quite honest, right? But there's many things you can do, because at the end of the day, especially if you're building marketplaces or social networks, stuff like that, it's really about putting people together, giving them a forum to basically be in. When it comes to other types of businesses, tech business, stuff like that, again, it really comes down to, as I said, like clear communication, to be quite honest. And that could be done many different ways. Obviously, one of them is design. Another one is make something extremely easy to use. Avoid what we call empty dance floor. Which is basically that when you log on to a service of some sort, that you don't feel that there's nobody there at all, right? But there's something to get you started, or something that keeps you engaged. There's a bunch of things you can do there, like when it comes to onboarding, where I would say that could help you tremendously. Experiencing growth at least. And then, at the end of the day, build a company that where you understand why you build it, right? Where you can kind of, your intuition works for you, that you can make right decisions, which I think is often underappreciated, because it's always about, finding that market opportunity. You're looking for a specific market. But some people we work with, some companies, they came to us with one idea about wanting to do, a advertising engine for the real estate world, right? And it was like an architect company, and then we started talking to them. It's like, well, what's your background? Like, do you have any technology background that allows you to build like this ad tech thing you want to do? And no, they didn't, right? And so we ended up, saying, well, what can you guys do, right? What do you actually have? What are your superpowers that nobody else have? And then we basically work with them towards something completely different, right? Which is like, they had a lot of connections to a lot of different types of experts, and that actually allowed them to kind of build a referral network for these types of people in the real estate world, right? So again, there's always these simple things that works really well, and then there's some clever things, the growth hacks that we all know about, that Airbnb did, or Reddit and stuff like that, obviously. But I think often it's like, keep it extremely simple and figure out if there's even a signal, if there's even somebody who wants your stuff. And then, if you find that with just one person, then find 2 people, and then find 4 people, and then find 8, and so that's, I think, would be my basic advice there.
So final question from my side, and I think it goes back to those early days of being an entrepreneur through hustle and trying to figure it out with very limited constraints. So I think constraints are super important, and it helps you kind of, forces you to make decisions a lot clearer and faster. So 2 things: you have a financial constraint and a time constraint. It's just hypothetical. Let's say you have $1,000, and you don't have your existing network of these corporations you can speak with and validate your idea. You need to build an MVP of your product. It'll be very, very simple, but you have 2 weeks to go out there and get your first customer. Just one customer, you said, right? 1, then you get 2, then 3. Just number 1. Where do you allocate that $1,000 and time? Where are you focusing your time and money to make that happen?
Oh, so well, time-wise, Well, again, obviously it depends on what kind of business, right? But so
Sure.
I would actually come back to my initial like weekend hacker example, right? Like that was as basically setting up a mailing list, and then I never went out and even I didn't spend $1 on that until I had to basically start paying Mailchimp for having too many people in my mailing list, right? So I would probably start with something like that, to be quite honest. If I only had 1,000 there, I would find the cheapest way to establish a user base. That would probably be something like a mailing list, right? And then I would try to figure out what could I connect people around. And then spend a little bit of time setting up a website. But even that kind of stuff today, again, most design is solved, right? It's not like that there is like some unique, way to have people be onboarded to your website. A lot of these design patterns are already established. So I probably would even be so lazy as I would go out and find an existing template, to be quite honest, of something. Just change, a little bit, have a logo, maybe change some colors, obviously do some work with the text, and then I would like figure out whether I could convince people. Maybe I have $500 left. I would spend them on Facebook ads and Google ads and see, if there's any givers and takers there. I think that's the way I would probably approach that.
Nice. So build a simple page, get some email lists going on, and then find a way to drive traffic, paid $500 through Google or ads, and see if people are subscribing and gauging interest.
I mean, something like that. That would be that would be the right way, I think, to approach that. And that because you can pivot 1,000 times with this, right?
Exactly. Interesting. Awesome. Well, where can our audience get in touch with you, learn more about your venture studio, or consider if they want to be part of your program?
So if they can go to one place they could go is obviously our website, firstprinciple.co. Still trying to get the .com, but they don't want to answer us. We don't know why. Or they can follow me on Twitter. hello_world is my Twitter handle. So say those are the two places they can get in contact with us.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Thomas. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you all for listening in to today's episode. Don't forget to join us for another episode where we interview top leaders and experts in the business and SaaS industry. If you enjoyed this episode, I ask that you please give us a 5-star review on iTunes. That would be really, really appreciated. Otherwise, if you have any feedback, suggestions, or improvements for this podcast, please feel free to send it directly to me on our website at horizoncapital.com. Or you can just tweet me at Akil Jabbar. Thanks again, and hope to see you guys on the next episode.